It's not secret that eating licorice doesn't just ruin your taste buds but also damages your brain, which is why you end up playing League of Legends. But according to some internet legends, this gastronomic wonder was developed in top-secret Soviet biolabs, the same one that specialized in poisons and human experiments. We all know that the Soviets, with the help of the KGB, loved to catch, torture and kill people who were dangerous to their regime. However, the most interesting instrument of torture and extermination was Laboratory X, also known as Lab 12 or simply the chamber. This research center is believed to have been founded in the 1920s with Lenin's involvement. Legend has it that in 1922, after a debilitating stroke, Lenin wanted to kill himself with cyanide and asked Stalin to get it for him. But for some reason the Georgian refused. A few years later, Joseph Stalin established the USSR first poison laboratory, just in case he ever needed some on short notice. However, in my opinion, it is more important to know not what kind of trash founded this laboratory, but what exactly they did there. This institution did not only develop poisons. First of all, a group of assassins was immediately attached to this laboratory. In their free time between conquering checkpoints and climbing towers, they carried out various political assassination of enemies of the Soviet regime. But not only in the Soviet Union. For example, there is a testimony of a passerby in Paris in January 1930 who says that he saw Alexander Kutepov, an anti-Bolshevik and head of the military wing of anti-Soviet emigre organization, being grabbed by 4 unknown persons, injected with some kind of a drug, thrown into a car and taken to an unknown destination. As you can imagine, no one ever saw him again. These assassins could inject their victims with many things. In its early years, our laboratory experimented with more than a dozen poisons, from the popular thallium and cyanide to the lesser-known colchicine, digitoxin, aconantine, strychnine and curare. Pretty sure I saw half of these ingredients listed on a can of Dr. Pepper. On top of that, there is evidence that these poisons were tested on Gulag prisoners and possibly even hospital patients by saying it was a vaccination or medicine. But since this case remains classified in Russia, it is hard to say for sure. Over time, this death laboratory came under the direct supervision of NKVD chief Henryk Yagoda. For those who don't know, he was one of the organizers of the Holodomor and just a big fan of this popular mustache. Eventually, Stalin had him arrested and executed in the late 1930s. The official reason? Allegedly using poison to kill people. You didn't think that the USSR would come up with a more interesting reason, did you? People will believe it anyway. By the way, if you hear in the news that someone stole a Ukrainian dish called banderiks from a restaurant, you should know that it's me. I love them very much, but the Soviets apparently didn't like it because the name reminded them of Stepan Bandera, a political figure and hero of Ukraine who fought for Ukrainians' independence in the 1930s and 1940s. In case you didn't know, Bandera was assassinated in Munich in 1959 with a cyanide bullet. Whether this laboratory was behind the poison and the weapon is unclear, but what is clear is that many Ukrainians suffered and died because of its work. What's also clear is that unfortunately hybrid charging stations are becoming more and more common due to the daily shelling of my country and its energy infrastructure by the Russians. But an ape-human hybrid, even for the Soviet Union, that's a bit much. Ilya Ivanov was born in Russia at the end of the 19th century. After studying at Kharkiv University, he became one of the Russia's leading experts in AI, or artificial insemination, and even gained some international recognition. For example, Ilya managed to breed hybrids of zebra and donkey, mouse and rat, bison and cow, rabbit and hare, and many others. But what fascinated him most was the idea of creating an ape-human hybrid. In theory, such a hybrid could be both funny and cool, strong like an ape but with a more advanced brain like a human. They could have made great soldiers and workers. And of course, not the least reason for creating an ape-human hybrid was the theory of evolution. You wouldn't believe how many anti-religious institutions, both in the USSR and beyond, were interested in such a hybrid, because it would prove that evolution exists and stupid God believers would suck. But come on, in 2025 we already know that God exists. I even took a picture with him the other day. Ivanov's first attempts to create an ape-human hybrid were made in 1924 in French Guiana and were funded by the Soviet Union. However, these initial attempts were unsuccessful and all 3 of them failed. And after a while, during the next experiments, at least 5 women died from, let's just say, an unnatural attempt to get pregnant with non-human biomaterial. But that didn't stop Ilya. He and other scientists eventually expanded their experiments. They concluded that certain human races should be crossbred with specific species of monkeys. Yeah, this may sound absurd today there was a theory at the time suggesting that different human races evolved from different species of primates. It was believed that dark-skinned people came from gorillas, Asians from orangutans, and white people from chimpanzees. And you wouldn't believe what scientists eventually resorted in their attempts to create a hybrid. For example, there's evidence suggesting that Ivanov tried to impregnate black women with monkey semen without their consent, all under the pretense of a medical examination at the local hospital. Although some countries like France prohibited him from doing so, the Soviets dismissed these concerns as primitive fears and bourgeois prejudices, believing the experiments should continue. It is unknown whether Ivanov and his team did even more disgusting things to succeed, but in the end the project failed and was shut down. Nowadays we know that humans and monkeys have different numbers of chromosomes, making such a hybrid impossible. But back then the Soviets and scientists were deeply frustrated by the failure, not understanding why it didn't work. Since then the idea of creating such a hybrid has been brought up several times. Take Oliver for example. He was called an intermediate link in the evolution from chimpanzee to human and a successful hybrid of human and ape. But scientists quickly debunked this claim. Though Oliver could live on an island for 5 years and appear quite human, try to find here at least 5 differences, it's tough I know, but in the end Oliver was still just a normal ape. And you know, I love primates. They're so funny, just look at them. However, you definitely wouldn't want to end up in Soviet psychiatric hospital with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, especially if the authorities didn't like you. After World War II, the concept of schizophrenia in the Soviet Union was pretty vague. So vague in fact that psychiatrists in Leningrad, Kiev and Moscow gave different descriptions of this disease and couldn't even agree on what it actually was. As you can imagine, the Soviets decided to take advantage of this mistake and abuse it. At a certain time, suspiciously many prisoners or people who were dangerous to the regime were diagnosed with schizophrenia and sent to Soviet psychiatric clinics for torture. And let me remind you that these clinics look something like this. Still think Arkham Asylum is bad? Try checking into the Razan psychiatric hospital. The Soviet government of course always denied that they held and tortured political prisoners in psychiatric hospitals, saying, well, we don't hold such people, and if we did, we would be right. Just think, who without mental disorders would not like communism? Let me give you a better picture of what really went on in these institutions. Assaults and beatings, sometimes even to the point of death, forced drug injections. They'd feed people a cocktail of psychotropic drugs that dulled everything from speech and thinking to even the will to do anything other than, you know, staring at a single point. Add to that restriction of using the bathroom, overcrowded rooms, bans on keeping basic personal items, a total lack of rights, a lot of hard work, bad food, punishment for everything, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And even if someone entered these mental hospitals perfectly healthy, after a few months of that kind of treatment they could easily be paraded in front of the public and like, well, look at this, he's crazy and you didn't believe me. The imprisoned patients could end up staying there for years, if not for the rest of their lives. Just look at the case of Andros Toma. He was captured in 1945 and kept in psychiatric hospital in Russia for 53 years because the authorities thought he was insane and spoke some made-up language. He spoke Hungarian, cause you know, Andros was Hungarian, and it's not too different from what's happening now when Russians mock people in the occupied territories for speaking Ukrainian. I can't even imagine what Andros went through, considering the conditions and the treatment patients received in those hospitals. There even were times when some psychiatrists dared to question whether a political prisoner actually had a schizophrenia, but those doctors often mysteriously disappeared. They might even end up in the same mental hospital, but as a patients, who knows? But what I do know is that Chinese mythical creatures are an extremely interesting phenomenon, and you can learn more from this video.